Welcome, everyone. I'm Veronica Ryan, Education Officer here at Cloughjordan Ecovillage. It's a pleasure to see so many of you joining us today for the 6th episode in our Deep Listening series, Beyond CoP26, Identifying Transformative Pathways. For those of you who may not know much about us, Cloughjordan Ecovillage is based in County Tipperary in the centre of Ireland. We're an educational charity founded over 20 years ago with a mission to serve as an education, enterprise and research resource for all. Comprising a 67-acre site designed to support biodiversity, the Ecovillage is directly connected to the rural village of Cloughjordan. We now have over 120 residents living in more than 50 high-performance green homes, 20,000 newly planted trees, and Ireland's largest renewable energy district heating system. The community features a learning alliance of groups based in the Ecovillage who work and learn together. They include Cloughjordan Community Farm, a member-owned agroecological farm and Ireland's first CSA, which is Community Supported Agriculture. Cultivate Living and Learning Cooperative based in the Enterprise Centre runs the annual permaculture course. Django's Eco Hostel welcomes visitors and students alike. And Riot Ride Bakery and Bread School runs bread making courses and our very own bread club. Cloughjordan Arts has built a community amphitheatre right here on the land. The Dark Sky Bow and 7 Circuit Labyrinth are among other unique features that make up this thriving community. As a dynamic, creative and ambitious project, we are on a continual learning journey. And we're delighted to be joined by you all here today to identify and discuss transformative pathways. Thank you all for coming, and I'll now hand over to Peadar Kirby. Peadar.
Good morning, everybody. Fáilte roimh, Díomh ar maidin. And I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Sadhbh O'Neill, who is going to introduce us and give us a sense of COP26. She attended it as a climate activist, as an academic, working here in Dublin City University. And I suppose from our point of view, but as we observed COP26, as we have spent a week since it ended last Saturday assessing its implications, what we want to add to this conversation is an awareness that for all the breakthroughs that might be made at these global summits, and they are absolutely important, that what we vitally need are pathways being opened by local communities that are modeling this transformation of our economy, our society, our values. That is the only way that we can get to a low carbon society. And so that's what we want to add to the conversation a week after COP. COP is at a global level, we're at a local level, and it's the interaction of the two is opening transformative pathways. So I hand over to Sadhbh to give us an introduction to her experience of being at COP with a particular focus on its implications for our community projects. Sadhbh, lovely to have you with us.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Peadar, and for the invitation to join you this morning. I hope that I will be able to do my own share of deep listening, because there's definitely a need for that. I'm reminded as you were showing those slides there, Davy, that the first time I came across the Global Ecovillage Network was at one of the Sustainable Development post-Rio conferences that I would have attended in the 1990s. And at those conferences, there was a real sharing of ideas, learning, practical examples, theoretical debates. There was an extraordinary infusion of creativity and sharing at previous COPs, and all of that seems to have vanished from the international agenda. And increasingly, there is a growing differentiation between the delegations doing their negotiation and civil society, and climate activists are kept as far away from the whole scene as possible. And that was very much the case in Glasgow. It actually makes me very angry, but that may be a conversation for another day. In terms of the geopolitical outcomes of COP26, I think we have to acknowledge that the way that United Nations processes work is unlikely to ever deliver a kind of slam dunk breakthrough on climate action. The process is complex, it's legally bound by certain procedures that are set years in advance, and it's also constrained by competing agendas on the international level. Clearly there's an agenda of global justice and a demand for development and financial transfers, and so it's never always just about climate mitigation, and that sometimes acts to slow the process down, but has the potential at the same time to be more attentive to the needs of developing countries. So whenever we hear about breakthroughs, they tend to be in the form of bilateral agreements between countries or side deals. And these are not to be dismissed. There's significant shifts there in terms of US and China cooperation, the new commitment by India to achieve net zero, which is an extraordinary challenging target for 2070, commitments around methane and climate finance. And all of these things are, they don't have a practical significance in Cloughjordan, but they do have global significance in terms of shaping the agenda for global cooperation, for finance and for industry, and within our neoliberal globalized economy, it shapes the kind of evolution of that economy into the future. In terms of legally binding commitments, few and far between, and they're kind of a bit technical, but they are significant, and they will flow down to the national level in terms of policies that now have to be enacted to achieve the targets and commitments set out in the COP decision and also in the Paris Agreement itself. So we're at the point now where in Ireland, the political conversation has moved from one of agenda setting, of getting agreement around what the targets should be. Some people will obviously say they're not stringent enough or they're not Paris compliant, but to get to the point where there is a consensus around putting a legally binding target in law is not a small thing. And the next step is to move into the implementation stage. And that is where I think we are heading for some very turbulent times ahead, because the distributive implications, the knock-on effects on particular sectors, whether it's agriculture, transport, buildings and heating and all the rest of it, we're starting to realize are quite profound. And I think there's still a lack of appreciation, a lack of understanding in society as a whole, how challenging it's going to be to achieve these targets and how necessary it's going to be for people to want to achieve them, because there's, in certain quarters at least, resistance to change or perceived unfairness that may or may not be true, as in you can have policies that are going to affect some communities more than others, but it's not to say that they can't be mitigated by other measures if there's a political will to do that. So I think that so far we're seeing a kind of political discourse which is still trying to avoid the thorny issues of actually implementing the agreed targets. And for me, as a policy person, as a bit of a policy wonk, I find that extremely frustrating. In fairness to the agricultural sector, they have a very clear idea of what they think is coming down the line, and they're resisting that. But where is the community, apart from, I see Ollie is here, apart from people like Ollie and his cohort of progressive farmers doing all kinds of exciting things in agriculture, there's very little voice given to the people who want to deliver on these targets and who see the opportunities for reshaping our politics and our local environments around ecological principles. Because we know that things are desperate. We are in an absolutely desperate situation, whether it be from global climate change or biodiversity loss and the sort of whittling away of environmental quality across a range of indicators and media. And these problems are only becoming more and more severe. And yet I have a sense that people are still quite detached from that. There's still a kind of a lack of ecological literacy or cultural awareness or appreciation of what we are losing and the danger that that poses to us and the loss for our future generations. So I just want to turn finally, and Davey's going to interrupt me if I'm speaking too long. But
take your time, Sadhbh. You've got loads of time.
I mean, okay.
So just take your time.
Take my time. Okay, so I wanted to address because I know this will be of interest to Pader particularly, but hopefully the rest of you as well. So following the COP, there was quite a lot of interesting debate about how to interpret the outcome, and not just the outcomes, but the experience, the sense of what does it mean to be a climate activist? What is the right strategy for us to deploy in this terribly depressing and terribly unresponsive international regime? And there is a debate that has emerged between two camps in particular. And one of them might be best exemplified by Rupert Read. Rupert Read was the one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, but he stepped away a little bit from that. He's an academic by profession. He's a philosopher. And he wrote this very fascinating essay, which I didn't pull the link out, but I would encourage you all to have a read of it. And he talks about the need for a moderate flank, that the way that Extinction Rebellion was modeling its strategy was based on constantly trying to upend or disrupt the center, and to provoke, I suppose, that 3.5 critical mass to try to drive change, to try to insert itself into the political conversation and upend the normal. And Rupert Read says that this was all great, but the problem is it hasn't worked. If success is measured by, increasing political consciousness, stronger actions and reducing emissions in the way that Extinction Rebellion was demanding, getting closer to what they were looking for is, I think, net zero by 2025. And the Citizens' Assembly, which they did ask for, which was introduced in the UK, was very much a sideshow. It was very much played down by the British government, and there was very little kind of sense of it being a participatory or deliberative tool that was going to shape climate politics in the UK. So out of his kind of sense of despair and a sense of failure and a sense of having been involved in certain initiatives that haven't worked, he thinks, Rupert Read argues that we need to work not so much towards radicalism, but towards moderation, how to get the centre ground to shift. And in contrast to his argument, you have George Monbiot. Thank you, Davy, for putting it up, right? George Monbiot responded very politely, very diplomatically, and on Twitter, and you'll find his Twitter thread there somewhere easily enough. And he argues that that's a waste of time. The moderate is the problem. The moderate are the ones with high, per capita consumption of emissions. The moderation doesn't want change, and therefore we need to be, picking away at moderation. Now, I'm simplifying quite a complex debate, but I think from my experience of being involved in climate politics and being involved in civil society, I think that this debate between the two kind of climate gurus is one that we need to pay attention to. And I think we need to reflect on this debate and see what we can learn from it, because I do see, and I have seen for the last couple of years, increasing fragmentation politically in the climate movement. Now, sometimes that can come about simply because the movement is broader, and it's no surprise and it's to be welcomed. But sometimes it happens because there's a kind of implicit disagreement about strategy or expectations that are not put on the table in a direct way. Like, what are we really trying to get, and how do we think we're going to get it? And increasingly, I see the youth participants at the COP and everything very dismayed and very feeling extremely hopeless, because this kind of debate is not delivering action, and also they have a particular focus on participation. And of course, the COP26 was a disaster from that point of view. So I suppose what I'm trying to put to us as a set of questions, and I don't know that I have worked out answers for myself, is how should we think about strategy going forwards? So you guys in Cloughjordan have a different kind of strategy, which is modeling. You're doing it, and then you're showing it up to the world as an example of what ecological sustainability, low carbon, integrated community and intentional community can look like. But why aren't there more Cloughjordans? you're an astounding success. So why doesn't everybody want to live like you're living in Cloughjordan? I mean, this is a puzzle to me, because I'm just, you know, amazed at how fantastic your community is. What are the barriers to the kind of social organization that we need to have, that kind of community, intentional communities, because they could theoretically pop up anywhere? I suppose Sol is going to maybe tell us about this, but from my point of view, more from the political side, I'm extremely concerned about this sort of fragmentation and fractiousness that I perceive, because I don't think, I'm not sure instinctively that either Rupert Reid or Monbiot are wrong. I think it's one of those situations where they're both right. And therefore we need to find a way of respecting people who pursue different strategies. And we also need to operate as a movement in ways that don't what would be the best way of expressing it? Don't give the lie to failure. Like, failure is not an option here. So I have teenage kids, and I just can't bear the idea of everything that I've worked for the last 30 years and saying, you know, guys, I'm going to give up because there's no hope. You're finished. And that's the message that a lot of the youth groups came away from the COP with. And I feel a sense of moral obligation that that's not right, that there's something there we need to fix. I don't really know how to fix it. I think I should stop there, Davy, and leave you with all those questions, and hopefully we'll get some discussion about them at some point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sadhbh. That was very, very rich, and that's precisely, I think, the the level of reflection on something like COP26 that we need to do. It brings it back to us. It takes it out of those that sort of rarefied atmosphere of emissions cuts and methane cuts and deforestation and electric vehicles, all important. But for us, in our everyday lives, our lifestyles, our values, our options, these are the things that we need to look at. And to do that together, to build community around those, is really crucial. And so that's why we've invited three speakers that will each speak to us about different levels of experience at building transformative pathways. And we begin with our own Eileen Branningan from Cloughjordan Ecovillage, who will focus in on the local of what we are trying to do in terms of modeling that transformative pathway of a move towards both a zero carbon, but also a biodiverse and sustainable and resilient community. Then we'll move into Pauliina Helle, who is Network and Outreach Officer at Ecolise and also lives in a Finnish local community. So she will be able to bridge that gap, if you like, between the very local experience that we have here in Cloughjordan and the European experience, where there are many, many examples of communities that are doing this. And Pauliina will speak to us about that. And then we'll end up with a more global focus from Trumbo Vila, who's an economist and a political activist working now in the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam. And the Transnational Institute, as Sol will tell us about, has a long, long history, but is moving more and more into projects, many, many varied projects, which touch on many of the complex elements of what it will take to move humanity towards a sustainable society, the sort of thing that Sadhbh was talking about, that those many, many dimensions, as Sadhbh quite rightly said, in my view, that most people really don't get the scale of the change that's facing us. So we'll start with Eileen, and we'll move then into Pauliina and Sol, and that will open the space then for a conversation between our four participants before, towards the end, we'll open up to all of you to come in and make your contributions. I do repeat, please write your contributions in the chat as the speakers are speaking, and that will give us themes that we can come back to before the end. So Eileen, delighted to have you, and thank you for introducing our community here to our participants. Over to Eileen.
Okay, hello everyone. I really enjoyed that overview from you, Sadhbh, and I'd love to hear more about your responses and thoughts on COP, depressing as they are. And as you say, I also think that many of the things that we don't get to hear at COP and never will at such meetings are, as you said, the personal lived experience of the direct and practical ways that we as local communities can transform the way we live, and how our eco-communities can demonstrate that it is possible to live differently in order to walk a little more lightly on the planet. So I'd like to highlight that in this part. So my name is Eileen Branningan, and I've lived here in Cloughjordan village for the last 8 years with my partner and our son and our 2 dogs. My family and I came from Dublin, from Ireland's capital city, to settle in the middle of rural Tipperary back in 2013. And it felt like quite a big step at the time. But to be honest, it's actually hard to imagine living elsewhere now. We have become part of a very interesting and creative living lab here, as it were, by moving here. And I say living lab because living in an eco-village involves being prepared to experiment and to take new approaches. And I suppose in the same way, like living more lightly on the earth requires some creative thinking and a willingness to learn, or as I found more accurately, to relearn how to live in harmony with your surroundings and with other people. So just to talk about what we do here and how we do it, Cloughjordan Ecovillage was intentionally created more than 2 decades ago to be a community that would serve as a model for sustainable living into the 21st century. And in the process, we intended our village to be a resource for education, enterprise, and research for the wider community and beyond. And basically, we're a community who, by the way that we live, practically demonstrate an economically, socially, and ecologically viable community. And by using approaches that are, we think, are a viable alternative to the heavily consumerist mainstream. So that is, we're trying to reduce our impact upon the planet in concrete and practical ways, basically. We want to waste less energy, we want to manage our resources, and we want to try and achieve the transition to a lower carbon lifestyle. However, a very important point, especially, well, to me anyway, is that we're not off-grid, and that our eco-village has always intended to model that lifestyle in a way that is genuinely achievable for all communities in Ireland and, in fact, around the world. And in turn, we have taken some best practices from around the world ourselves in order to try and implement innovative approaches here. So our eco-village demonstrates the following, and I hope I remember, I think of a bit of a list.
You're muted for some reason, Eileen. You're muted, Eileen.
Sorry, someone else muted me there accidentally, I think. So our eco-village demonstrates the following: sustainable housing, including natural and green building, sustainable urban drainage systems, local food systems by our community CSA farm, where we demonstrate community supported agriculture and how it can transform our relationship with local food. Also our allotments and our planted fruit and nut trees. And the Ecovillage also demonstrates the benefits of shared energy via our district heating system. We foster local enterprise via our village-based enterprises, including the enterprise centre itself, called We Create, which houses the sustainability NGO Cultivate, the Fab Lab, a digital fabrication lab, a digital studio, and our local food hub and market. Other village-based enterprises are Riot Rye, the Wood-Fired Bakery, and Bread School, and Django's Eco Hostel. So here in the Ecovillage, we demonstrate the importance of maintaining ecological balance and enhancing biodiversity through our edible landscapes and our wildlife corridors, our community woodland and our biodiversity trail, our sensory garden, our thousands of trees, including pear, apple, pear, and hazel trees, our indigenous apple tree walk, our composting areas, and also our regenerative agriculture methods, including agroecology on our community farm. Our educational offerings include our research and development gardens, permaculture design courses, sustainable growing courses, including the development of community seed banks, which we're doing courses on just now, and the academic research, obviously, that we've contributed to over the years since our inception. So we're also involved in many Erasmus and European learning projects and partnerships through our multiple learning networks. We've connections with schools, colleges and universities and other learning institutes. Our cultural and community-based connection is made via many annual events here, including Feeding Ourselves, CSA and food solidarity conferences like Feeding Ourselves, and music, and theatre events at our outdoor community amphitheatre. And we also have a community labyrinth based upon an ancient Celtic design and a stargazing area called the Dark Sky Bowl at the Mound for quiet reflection and a more direct interaction with nature. So, I mean, this list, and I did make a list, but it's not exhaustive, it's just an overview. But it also has to be said that obviously this place is not utopia by any means. I mean, anyone who lives here can tell you that. We still have many challenges to meet and many problems to overcome. And there are many aspects we do in fact need to do differently. But I'm buoyed up by the fact that we are trying, and also that we have succeeded at some key aspects of this alternative approach to living. And I personally would hope to sort of remain a part of this constantly evolving experiment for some time to come. And I believe now is the time more than ever to bring community and how we create community resilience as a response to climate change into the heart of the conversation. And thanks, that's about all I have to say about that.
Thank you very much, Eileen. That gave us a rich overview of the complexity and the the variety of what happens in our little community, which is only a community of 100 people. It amazes me sometimes how much, if people put their minds to it, how much a small group of people can do. So from the west of Ireland in Cloughjordan, we go to the east of Europe in Finland. And Pauliina, it's wonderful to have you with us. Wonderful to have you as somebody who lives in a local rural community in Finland and works at a pan-European level in Ecolise. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Yes, like it has been presented, I work for Ecolise, which is the European network for community-led initiatives on climate change and sustainability. And what Eileen just beautifully described with Cloughjordan as an example, that's a really beautiful example of what these community-led initiatives can be, for example, but they're very diverse. And besides working for Ecolise, as it was already mentioned, I also have my personal background, my story in individually seeking for a sustainable lifestyle and ultimately for a very meaningful and purposeful way to live on this planet through different lifestyle experiments from primitive living in the wilderness to self-sufficient homesteading and currently living in a tiny house community in southern Finland, and also being very active at my local village. And these experiences in my own life, my story of learning has really led me from more of an individual approach to believing in the power of community in when I think of the large scale change that we need to catalyze, that there is a really, I believe that communities really hold a crucial role in the multiple crises that we're facing and the challenges. And this is what truly motivates me to work on the European level with Ecolise, where I have the privilege of witnessing such a broad range of diverse initiatives of empowered communities that take change in their own hands. So we have 47 members from 21 countries all around Europe, and the three pillars of our membership are ecovillages, like Cloughjordan being a good example. We have both national and European, and also the global Ecovillage network as our members, and then permaculture and transition. So these are initiatives that operate on different types of environment, not only as ecovillages may be often rural and perhaps more isolated, and whereas then there's so many different ways in different contexts to engage with the local community and find solutions, such as transition then often representing more village scale existing municipalities and also cities, and often these initiatives are not just focusing on one thing, like we beautifully heard with Eileen, that it's you start with something and you find other things that complement what you're doing, and the community aspect there. It creates this positive positively feeding itself, and the diversity of the different approaches that complement each other, and the starting point often for this is not in living a low carbon life as a starting point, but often more in really seeking for well-being, for something that is more fair, more just, more like a meaningful way to live, and as a side effect, there often comes a lot of different positive consequences, and also new goals, which is really the power of these approaches as well. And yes, like it was mentioned here, there's huge potential in the solutions and examples that are already there, that these projects are pioneering and showcasing for how that low carbon future and also socially just future can look in practice, which is often missing in the conversations in the horizon that we have, and that's really the huge potential that there is in bringing out more, making more visible these existing projects, and that is what we're trying to do in Ecolise with our action program, Communities for Future, which aims at mainstreaming these approaches and bringing more public awareness to things that are possible, and making combining the dots in showing the bigger picture, that it's not just about separate small project here and there, but it's actually a very broad and diverse network and movement of action that communities are taking, that has a long-standing history and deep expertise, and there's a lot of potential in scaling this out. So I think I stop here for now, and we can come back.
Pauliina, thank you very, very much. I think that has given us a broader scale overview, the joining up of the dots, the potential of these local communities. We can come back to those in our discussion. And now to move to an even higher level, I'm delighted to invite Saul to share his very rich and varied experience about the different sorts of pathways that are emerging all over the world. Saul, over to you.
Thank you very much for this introduction, Pedro. Thank you very much for providing this space today. I'm very glad to be here with all of you and to hear the other interventions. I look forward to the discussion as well. I will briefly start with how I end up here, in a way, how I end up doing this work. I'm Spanish by origin, and I migrated to the Netherlands partially because of the financial crisis in 2008. And when around Europe started with the inspiration from the Arab Spring and the Indignados, we got organized politically to stop the Troika policies, which I'm sure in Ireland you are very familiar with. Is how is through this political activism on the resistance against the privatization of common goods in Europe, how I met TNI, where I work for 9 years now. And I will just briefly introduce what TNI does. We are an almost 50 years old organization And through our history, we have been a unique nexus between social movements, policymakers, and engaged scholars. And by providing this nexus, we have been promoting ideas, solutions for addressing our global challenges. So through that work, along several decades, we have touched many, many issues, from the apartheid in South Africa in the 80s to the global justice movement and the World Social Forums in the 90s. And where I'm developing most of my work and where I will focus today is on the Public Alternatives Program. The Public Alternatives Program aims to create a force that reverses the privatization of our common goods globally, which has happened especially since the 80s with the neoliberal policies implemented around the world. And this work started particularly like 15 years ago after the water wars in Cochabamba, where there was a first big victory against the privatization of water, against big transnational corporations. And through that work, we have been mapping processes where the privatization of common goods, starting with water, have been reversed and that have been put back into public hands or in other forms of community management, democratic and accountable. And through that work, we have now already mapped 1,500 cases around the world where goods and services that were privatized are now back into public hands. And I mean public hands in a broad sense. It's not only state-owned forms of ownership, there are a whole panorama of different forms of public management of the goods. So by giving these numbers, like 1,500 cases, looking at the remunicipalization, if we use the word of public goods and services, you get to one of the points of my intervention today, which will explain the work I do at TNI, which is how we actually navigate the enormous and vast universe of alternatives to capitalist modes of production that are happening around the world. And we have great interventions already explaining how this is actually happening in many places around the world. In Europe, there are many examples, but there are also many others. And how we reverse this. So how we address this urgent need, as we know, to find practices, models that are actually being transformative already. And this is not easy because the neoliberal dogma since the 80s, pushed by Thatcher and Reagan first on the TINA, there is no alternative to this idea of privatization of common goods or what so-called liberalization of different markets, which usually means reducing the rights of peoples. So actually we know the opposite is true. There are so many alternatives that it's hard to know where to look at. We find it difficult to distinguish the anecdotal from initiatives that have a systemic character of transformation, especially if you are looking at the global level. And this is like looking at the sky at night. We see hundreds, even thousands of amazing local initiatives who are doing fantastic transformative work. Some are brighter than others, some are bigger than others, but there are so many that often you don't know where to look at. And also what has happened also is that there are a number of constellations that are trying to give a name of things that are happening. And there are many debates on this. So you have the many movements and narratives like the social and solidarity economy, the growth, defense of the commons, the remunicipalization of public services, the buen vivir, good living in Latin America, the just transition, neo-municipalism, trying to achieve power at the local government level, ecofeminism, community wealth building, right to the city, and so on. So we have all these narratives, spaces, networks, and platforms that try to give clues of how post-capitalist futures are or should be. And we find these difficulties. So what should I actually look at? So with this interest or looking at local practices, we decided to launch an initiative that I'm going to briefly share with you, which it's really a kind of different initiative than what we usually do at TNI, which is usually doing reports and doing conferences, etc. And so we decided to, with this interest on the local level, to launch the Transformative Cities People's Choice Award and the Atlas of Utopias. And of course, launching an award from an organization like us, TNI, it's really out of our comfort zone because we believe in cooperation and solidarity as a way to achieve our common objectives. But we thought that an award could bring an interesting element to increase public awareness and attention. So for us, this is a process of co-petition, which means it really is aiming to foster collaboration between local initiatives, but we introduce this element of competition. And this award, we see it as a process platform that assumes that the struggle for cultural hegemony is central, that internalizes both theoretical knowledge and existing experience in the construction of post-capitalism, but gives the public the final decision on the winners. So how this is actually work, for 4 years now, we have launched an open call for local initiatives around the world, which can have all kinds of forms. So Cloughjordan actually was one of the candidates to win the award, even though it's called Transformative Cities. We were really open about that in terms of, we are not so much interested on the city as an urban concept, but cities as places of struggles who have a definite environment. And I can explore that later in the discussion, but we believe in the current context it's very interesting to look at political practices happening in local context as a way to understand them better. And the second element we bring to look at these local initiatives is how are they actually ensuring access to basic rights? So how are initiatives looking, how are communities, groups, all kinds of organizations, from trade unions to social movements to actually city councils, how are they ensuring access to water, to energy, to housing, to food? And through this open call, we have been collecting initiatives from all over the world, where we then do a peer review process to evaluate them, which is also a learning process. We are trying to understand how to evaluate different initiatives around the world. And then we have a number of finalists who then receive the support from a journalist to tell the story to the world. And then after that, we do have a vote, which is open to the public. And this is a way the winners of the award get this People's Choice Award. And the open call of the 4th edition is just open. So good coincidence, this week we open. I'm going to leave a number of links in the chat. So first, the link to the Transformative Cities Initiative itself, which is here, the Atlas of Utopias, which is this panorama of some of the really inspiring and interesting initiatives we have been collecting along the years. They are not all of them, so there are others on the website you can look for participants from previous editions. And finally, I will just share the open call for this year. And yeah, I leave it here, and I will be glad to answer any questions about this and to touch on other topics like, so how this, yeah, why the COP was a failure. I think that's an interesting element to see, and what are the power imbalances there, and what is the framework that makes spaces like COP a failure. I leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saul. That was wonderful. That gave us yet a bigger global picture. And I think what was really interesting about your focus, and of course the long-term work of TNI, is that it moves us out of what sometimes can be a little parallel universe, the parallel universe of, of environmentalism or of climate change activism, into the bigger universe of struggles for justice, of struggles for transformation, of the development of post-capitalist futures. And I think that's more and more what both climate change and biodiversity loss are pushing humanity into, is a post-capitalist future. And you richly described so many of the different initiatives that are being taken at all sorts of levels all over the world, taking us back to the water wars in Cochabamba. That we're all part of an ongoing struggle, and those of us who have moved into focusing more on climate change, it's not as if it's a different issue. It's another linking up with the way in which our planet, our human lives are being destroyed by a system which forces us to live in certain ways that many people really don't want to do, but have few options to get out of. So Sai started us with the idea of a strategy, and I'd like maybe to come back to that for all of us. And my opening question then is whether focusing in on this myriad of different experiences, the challenge to join the dots, as Pauliina said, offers us a different way of engaging with the question of strategies. So maybe I'll go back to Sai first of all, and the rest of you can be thinking from your neck of the woods, from your particular experiences. What sort of bigger strategies do we have in mind, or do we really think very much at that level? Sai.
I was hoping other people would respond to this. Well, as speaking as someone who's dipped a few toes into politics over the years, including green politics, I tend to see it through that lens. I'm interested in representative politics. I'm interested in shaping the agendas on the political system, such as it is. Now, many people think that's a waste of time, and that's fine, and they go out and do other things, build eco-villages, and that's brilliant. We need that. They're not contradictory strategies. And I think it's also important to note that that debate between Reid and Monbiot and other people as well comes in the context of UK politics, which is particularly partisan, and it's also limited to a huge degree by the first past the vote system. We have a much more pluralist polity here in Ireland, and that creates opportunities and also constraints. So I suppose, to cut to the chase, I'm interested in greening the political system. I'm interested in greening other political parties and building consensus at the level of politics, which is not the be all and end all, but at the level of politics. I'm interested in, trying to get a kind of consensus, a kind of a form of dialogue and agreement, a kind of new social contract that political parties are not then trying to undermine in their competitive zeal when it comes to the next election. Now, the critical point and the critical player for us in Ireland at the moment is not really the centre-right parties, because they're kind of locked into the climate bill. They've committed to that. Now they could well, retreat, depending on the pressures, especially in the agricultural lobby. But it's the role of the big left-wing parties that are not in government, the likes of Sinn Féin and the other parties that they might end up forming a government with in the future. So for me, the question is, how do people like me help shape the agenda that they bring? How do we persuade them that they can take on this agenda and be the ones to deliver on it without having any experience beforehand in government, but to own it and buy into it and mean it? And unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of shall we say, cherry picking at the moment. Now, sometimes opposition parties do that. They don't have to have all the answers. They're in opposition. But so that's a very narrow answer to your question, Pader. And I appreciate that it's only one part of the political discourse, but it's the part that I'm interested in. And I'm sure other people have many other ideas about how to advance the cause in other ways.
But Tive, it has moved us, I think, from the focus in on a strategy that's either extreme or moderate, which is one way of looking at that, to a strategy that tries to transform politics from the bottom up, if you like. You named it as greening politics, but Saul might prefer to name it as developing a post-capitalist politics. I think, to me, I worry that the word greening itself has become a word which is used for we also in English talk about whitewashing. It's used, in other words, for groups pretending that they're doing things that they're not doing. So I'd like to ask the other three speakers, two of you, of course, from a non-Irish locale, but obviously where this issue still is a live issue. It's a live issue globally, and that is, how do the transformative efforts that are happening at grassroots level link in with a politics that in all our countries, there are no exceptions, maybe Costa Rica, we could say, but I know Costa Rica personally, and that's no paragon of virtue either at a political level, you know, at political systems that are dysfunctional, that just aren't able to cope with the scale of transformation that we require. So Pauliina, Eileen, Sol, any insights?
Well, I was just going to say that I find, you know, just when Sadhbh was referring to the political system, like in Ireland, certainly the more radical things that have occurred in this country have occurred through citizens' assemblies. And I'm just wondering how in some way we get, we manage to sort of have greater lobbying power from eco-villages and sort of sustainable communities around the place in order to sort of inform those citizens' assemblies and how they become more representative. I mean, with the marriage referendum, gay marriage, and with the repeal of the 8th, citizens' assemblies had massive influence in both of those. And I think we all know our standard political systems are not going to work. It's somehow giving citizens more power to speak, because I think people in this country are much more radical, moderate to radical than conservative, if you give them a chance to speak, you know, and they just don't get that chance. Even though our country is small, we have access to our politicians. It's a hereditary and nepotistic system. And I was just thinking, you know, if only we could get our own communities as well acting like ecosystems, you know, our own communities coming together, that would be an excellent thing. But how we feed then into, I mean, other people will argue, of course, that we just need to absolutely change the system. It's how we do that. But I think, you know, a start is somehow to get the public voice out there. It's always more radical than our representatives. I'd like to just throw that out there. Thank you,
Eileen. Now, if Sol and Pauliina don't feel you're venting to add to this, I certainly have plenty to add. Sol, I see you on.
Yes. One of the most inspiring developments in the last years in Europe, in my opinion, has been the growing interest of engagement in what you will call party politics at the local level, what is called the new municipalism wave by some, and which was very strong in Spain, where I'm from, as I'm very familiar, I'm sure, of Ada Colau's mayorship in Barcelona and how she came from a really activist background to be the mayor of the city. And this has been replicated in many ways in different cities, also coming from different backgrounds. No? So the last big wave was in France, where there was a huge wave of new engagement in local politics. And that's very important, because I totally agree with Sadhbh that we cannot neglect this level of, if you like, institutional politics, no? And there are definitely limits to social movements, unfortunately, but it is true. And that's why one of the reasons many of the Spanish activists decided to go to elections. And that was a wise decision, because there is a moment, well, there are broader questions about what is your theory of change, etc. No, but definitely we had 2 million people demonstrating in Madrid at some point, and the response was anti-riot police. So there is a moment where no matter how many people you put on the street, the state uses repression. So where do we go from there? And the response was, we know that the political system as it is now, which is a liberal system coming from 200-300 years of capitalist development, which pros and cons, whatever, but we know many of the dysfunctionalities. But these dysfunctionalities we see as are less strong at the local level. So when you look at municipal policies, you can really focus on policies that really have something more to do with people's life, and it's more easy to do certain changes, and also allows you to avoid certain debates. I give you an example. With the big years against the Troika at the European level, we were really working in many levels with Greek activists, Germans, Spanish. And one of the big issues there was, shall we leave the euro or not? That was a big one. And at some point, we didn't even want to discuss, because we knew it would really destroy the movement. But you cannot talk about economic policy in the EU without talking about the euro and how this entrenches neoliberalism. At the local level, you don't need to talk about the euro. you really need to talk, okay, so how are we actually promoting the energy transition or not? Who is actually owning our water or not? Which kind of advantages are we giving to transnational corporations or not? And how we can organize ourselves. So I just wanted to make this contribution of how we see really, really interesting possibilities engaging in local level institutional politics as a step forward, then eventually other forms of change at the national or regional level.
Thank you, Sol. That's very interesting. And I think what it highlights for us, some of these themes, is that our political systems offer different opportunities. Eileen has mentioned citizens' assemblies, which in Ireland emerged. The emphasis on municipalisation for us in Ireland isn't a space that's offering so far much possibilities because of the weakness and fragmentation of the powers of our local municipalities. Clearly in other systems they offer much more opportunities. I'm wondering at this stage if Pauliina would like to come in either with a reflection from the Finnish experience or a pan-European reflection from your involvement in Ecolise about this gap between our political systems and our transformative projects at local level.
Yes, well, while listening, I was mainly reflecting on like first of all, the challenge of scaling out these solutions on community level. That there is if you want the true transformative power to from the bottom up to rise, we need to be able to spread this to broader demographies, and that doesn't happen so easily through the feeling of threat over the climate framing and debates, but through addressing the authentic needs and concerns that exist there on the community level, and then how important it is that for successful implementation of like, for example, green infrastructure to get the support and the public approval, which depends on the communities feeling that they it's their thing, and that there's ownership and participation from the local level, and to for those changes to go through. And then on the other hand, the policymakers are not going to push for legislation and changes where they don't feel that there is approval. So both ways, there needs to be more communication and awareness and support and understanding.
Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, I think that it's brought up the fact that certainly as I was looking at what's happening at COP26, that our political leaders are very attentive to the limits that they feel that voters will allow them to go to. I don't know, Sadhbh, if you agree with that. And so that brings us back to a discussion about these transformations at grassroots level, and it's transformations of values and of the sorts of thing that Pauliina started off by talking about you know, wanting a life of better well-being. I mean, it comes back to that. How can we live well together? And it's at that level that real breakthroughs are required. I mean, Sadhbh, you were saying it, that we really need to change people's values. So Sol, looking at the Spanish experience, which I also know something about, it's very heartening to see that level of public pressure and public mobilization. And yet, you know, you go back to the Indignados in 2011, which filled me with hope, I must say. And yet, can we say that out of these transformative actions, that anything really transformative of the system is emerging, or do they just like water run into the sand?
So I reply to this, no? Yeah.
Well, it's a question for our Spaniard, yeah.
I was really in love with the movement. I was part of the movement, and we thought we were going to change the world, really. We were expanding the revolutions in the Netherlands, in my case, and we were having these massive assemblies in in 60 cities in Spain at some point, and then elsewhere in Europe. And I remember when I was really into the movement, to saw a lecture by Manuel Castells, which maybe you're familiar with as a sociologist from Berkeley University, I think. And his whole lecture was all movements, all social movements die. And I was like, what are you saying? No? What do you mean? No? And it's true. All social movements at some point die. Either they are so suppressed by the state that they are destroyed, or they are able to convert themselves into actors at the existing institutions. And there are many examples of movements who became political parties, which Podemos was an example, but also municipalist groups in Spain. But that has happened in Italy, in Latin America, which we could talk about the Latin American experiences of the 2000s, which were very, very interesting. And there are a lot of lessons to draw from there. So what I mean with this, that definitely these big, massive movements and what is happening now with the environmental movement, of course, they are changing. I mean, the debate now is different about the environment that was 10 years ago. And that has to do with environmental movements also. So of course, the climate crisis is more tangible and people feel it more in their fingers. And that has an element of it. But this constant mobilization, which we are still in the middle of it, is definitely having an effect. The same way 10 years ago with the financial crisis and the Occupy Wall Street and the Indignados movement, there was the debate about the financial system shifted. So there is definitely impact on these mobilizations. And I will just give a short example. There's his discussion, I'm not going to get into that now, but you know, Podemos as a party really was one of the outcomes of the movement, not the only one. And now we have a coalition government in Spain, which is the first one since the Second Republic, which, as you know, ended with a fascist dictatorship of 40 years old. So in the Spanish context, to have a coalition government is completely new. It never happened since the Republic. So that's a big change. And for some people, yeah, but still we need more access to housing, still we need more regulation for transnational corporations, etc. Of course, but definitely things change. Now, one of the big calls of the movement was, si se puede, no? Yes, it is possible. And Cloughjordan is the perfect example of that as well. It is possible.
But time is against us in all this. I mean, yes, things are changing, but I'm also struck by the fact that quite a lot of the mobilization around Europe over the last decade has been from the emergence of an alt-right, of a climate-denying right. So, you know, it's not all in the progressive direction that we might like. Maybe that takes us back to the emphasis on the need for a more moderate strategy. I don't know where I stand in that, because a more radical strategy can drive people back, you know, into spaces of fear and reaction. So maybe this is our last question. Yes, and I'll put it to all of you. Well, Sadhbh, you want to say something to what I've just said. My question was going to be was how much can we make sure that these changes, as they move beyond our grassroots projects, really are transforming us in the speed and with the profound changes that we so desperately need. Sadhbh, over to you.
I wanted to mention the work of Donella Meadows. Now, some of you who are interested in systems thinking will be familiar with her work, and she's a kind of leading figure in developing that discipline, that way of thinking. But Donella has a wonderful essay about leverage points. And because it's quite apolitical. She's talking about it in a kind of very abstract way. She could be talking about any system, a political system, an ecological system, a water system, a traffic system, you name it. And that's what's really interesting about it, because sometimes those of us who are involved in thinking about things are kind of locked into a certain way of thinking about policy and political change that's a little bit rigid. So what she says is that the most important thing, if you want to bring about system change, is to figure out where the leverage points are. And these are particular places in the system where you can make an intervention, ideally a kind of a low cost, efficient intervention, as in you might have a small number of people who can exercise a lot of influence. So the example there is the Citizens' Assembly, because if you want to get a shift in public opinion, the Citizens' Assemblies on abortion and marriage equality provided that very unique kind of style of conversation that allowed opinions to shift kind of effortlessly, getting quite dramatic change in public policy and the legal status for women and gay couples almost immediately, whereas that hadn't seemed possible for such a long time. So when we think about leverage points and where we are at the moment, I think the big challenge for climate activists is to identify where we can most effectively use our energy, because like everything else, our energy, our time, our capacity is limited. If you think about what you do in any given day, you get up, you do your usual routines. There's so many hours in the day you have to give to the cause. And that's assuming you don't have a day job or small children or other responsibilities in life. So what's the most effective way to use our power? And we know that it's by working together, but what's the most effective way to work together to achieve an outcome very quickly? And I don't know that I have the answer to this question, but that's how I'm setting it up for myself. How is the best way to leverage change as quickly as possible? And I don't think that it's going to come just from legislation, however important that is, because I completely agree that we need that kind of bottom-up momentum. And we need to tap into whatever reservoirs of support are there. They're probably quite latent. But we also need to work to educate the public. I just want to finish on one point, which is that one key difference between this COP and previous COPs is, at least in the Irish context, but probably many other countries, there was a huge increase in media coverage and media presence, and that's very welcome. And so that we were being, like those of us who were there were being bombarded with requests to do interviews, and that had never happened before. So is it because there's an appetite from the public for it? Not necessarily. I think the media is under pressure to do kind of public service broadcasting, and they're starting to get their heads around how important it is to cover these issues comprehensively and regularly, and not to be treating them as a kind of disastrous news that is more typical of the past. So I'm not really answering your question properly there at all, Pater, but just to say that I think it's a useful way of thinking about how we do develop a strategy. And it's always good to go back to Meadows. She's great.
Yes, Pauliina.
Yes, I wanted to go back to what you said about that we need a change of values. And I actually think that the values are in place. Like people, there is awareness, and people have strong values. And often I think most of us, if not all, are actually needing to live against their values in the society, in the systems that we currently have. So I think the values can be exactly those leverage points that Sadhbh is talking about, to really addressing those real values and those needs that are not being met, and showing how we can change quickly in a direction that is actually bringing that meaning that we're talking about, that good life that everybody wants.
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree. I must say, one of my richest experiences since I've come to live in the Ecovillage is that wow factor. I've spent my life educating people, but here in the Ecovillage, when you bring people here, there's that wow element. People have their eyes opened, and people go away saying that this is life-changing. You know, when you spend your life in university lecture halls, you never get people saying things like that. So that Pauliina, I think, names certainly for me as sort of a key element of what I conceive of as the strategy, as the leverage point, to use Sadhbh's term, that I can use. So let's hear from Eileen and Saul as we finish their ideas of leverage points, which may well be very different to those of the rest of us. All of us have our own opportunities.
Yeah, well, just listening to Sadhbh and listening to that conversation, I'm really interested in the conversation going on between, you know, moderate and radical action. My instincts, my personal instincts are radical. I mean, I was a member of Extinction Rebellion as soon as I became aware of it. And, you know, there'd be a good representation here in the Ecovillage, actually, in Extinction Rebellion. But I agree with Saul, all movements die. And in fact, unfortunately, I think Extinction Rebellion itself is in danger of getting sidelined as this is what Extinction Rebellion does. They do their street marches, they do their public actions, and I'm wondering how we even get around that. But I'm beginning. I mean, I almost eulogize the Ecovillage there in a way, simply because I think it is quite a moderate response. Actually, we don't live that radically. We're not off grid. We're very integrated with the local community, and a lot of our values, I think, are starting to seep in to our environment. And we take the best of what's there as well, like community, you know, relationships and intimacy and people supporting each other. And we've taken that into our community. And I think if only there's, I don't know, like Sadhbh, I'm not really sure how you make that link and show people this is not that hard to achieve. But there is that little piece that we have to do. But my thing would be like, everybody can live like this quite easily. It's not actually that hard, you know, and that we demonstrate that by a few fundamental changes, you know, and in your energy systems and so on, and how you connect with other people, you can make a sort of moderately radical impact, if that isn't a contradiction.
Thanks. We're over our time, so I'll give the last word to Saul.
Yeah, I would just like to echo something that Pauliina said, which is this issue of scale. This is something we have been discussing at TNI and with many others, because you see these post-capitalist utopias, real utopias, I would like to call them, no, because something that might be a utopia in a place, it's actually happening elsewhere, no? So these real utopias usually are very small, no? And how you escalate them without being co-opted in the bigger capitalist structures, the big flows, the big legislations, no? It's very, very difficult. And as also Pauliina said, very often people are forced to live against their values, really, no? And even those who actually achieve political power at the local level or the national level, no? You reach this small part of the power, and then you realize how limited you are. Like, to give an example, we have been working on also the public procurements in the EU. You cannot really make environmental policies on public procurement when you are at the municipality, because there are European law who says you should be competitive, you should just go the cheapest one, no? So even though you want to live in a different way, the legal framework is there. So this might be a bit of a negative example, but what I want, I would just to emphasize what Pauliina said in terms of people are forced to live against their values, and once they see the alternative, they embrace it. So how to make these alternatives more visible is something I think we're doing here today, and initiatives like Cloughjordan, show it is possible, no? And the more we know about this, the more people will think, actually, I can also live in that way. So there is a basic element of hope that is there. And I like the sentence of I'm a pessimist in the short term, but an optimist in the long term, because otherwise you cannot really live.
Great. Thank you, Saul. I'm conscious we're eating into the time that we put aside for wider voices to come in. So I'm going to hand over to Davy, who's been keeping an eye on the chat, to invite maybe a few people in before we end. We've about 15 minutes left. Davy.
Thanks, Pader. So our objective here is to hear other voices and maybe get a sense of where people are coming from. I'd like to maybe invite, just to start from the chat, I think it follows on well, Deirdre O'Leary, who's an artist living here, a musician living here in Cloughjordan Ecovillage. Deirdre, you made a good point, I think follows on well here. Can you unmute and come in and make that about the role of the arts? Do you have enough bandwidth, or will I read it?
Thanks, Davy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I loved what was being spoken about there. I do feel like the question at the end there was, how do we, there was some questioning of like, are we radical enough, I think, by Peadar, and I think my understanding of it, and also at the end there, I think people were saying, you know, how do we reach people to show them what is possible, people who are having to live outside of their values. I think that's art, and I think we need to, from within the kind of the art scene, I feel that most of us, I feel that most artists are also living outside their value system. Like most of us are working for money instead of, you know, having to follow the money, instead of understanding that our role is a really radical one. And I feel that artists kind of holds the dreams. That's what our role is. We hold a space for other people to dream in, and it can be any dream. The Nazis held that for people to dream of nationalism and you know, gas chambers, and or you know, one race. And I think it's a real responsibility to hold a space that people can dream of something that is kinder to nature and inclusive of. I think I'm reading Caliban and the Witch at the moment, and there's just so much. They got so far. They had got so far with their in you know, medieval times, 11th, 12th, 13th century, with their radical ideas of how women would be more empowered, how everybody could be how to bust hierarchies. They were basically doing what we villages are trying to do, but they were oppressed violently by the state and I just I think for that reason it's really important as well to work out, how do we include all the voices without pandering to those who are powerful? How are we going to persuade them that it's also the best thing for them?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that in, Deirdre. I think really seeing that this is a crisis of imagination, and that it's difficult to even imagine what's possible, and the arts play a leading role there in considering or opening up that creative space, that ability to see beyond what is possible right now. Anyone want to build on that? I can, if you want to raise your hand or just indicate you'd like to come in. We've only a few minutes, so it's really hearing some reflections, building on how we might move forward, build more of this space for transformation. Ollie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, but I'll let somebody else in first. If anyone
go for now, because no one else is wanting to come in. So you speak until someone else wants to come in. We've only a couple of minutes in this.
Yeah, okay. So I would, I think we're kind of past a certain stage right now, where the Climate Action Act that's in place and the mechanisms in place there have the potential to completely restructure rural Irish society in particular, if taken up by communities. Like the sectorial targets that are in, the funding mechanisms that are there from the carbon tax into just transition, like farmers can now get as much money from a carbon tax as from CAP. Mm-hmm. Like this is you know, there was 108 million spent in Laois and Offaly alone on just transition, including to the level of insulating houses. Like we're past the point of a few environmental experts asking for stuff. We're way past that point. Mm-hmm. We need to engage with what's actually in place and in motion so it doesn't become a greenwash. Mm-hmm. Because there's the potential for it to become a greenwash. I put a link into Pubble in the chat there. That's and right. The funding that's available for communities to start stepping up. Like we need to, like, and we're doing some events next year on just transition and diversification, specifically to try and build on the policy doc that the Environmental Pillar came up with, for example, in Swan and Stop Climate Chaos, on ag and what's happening in ag, because we need to actually get into the transition stage and diversification stage with real figures and real engagement with those communities. Like farmers are going to be in Dublin on Sunday, tomorrow, like protesting, and two-thirds of all farmers will benefit from the new CAP and the changes that are in there, and yet they're all feeling browbeaten into turning up and protesting. Even farmers from places like Roscommon, where 85% of them are going to benefit from the new CAP. So I think we need to start engaging with the mechanisms that are there for a just transition, and also engaging with Sinn Féin, because they don't agree with the carbon tax, and what is going to happen then if they come into power? They have to do an 8% transition every year, and they won't have any money to do it. So
Okay,
I think there's engagements that need to happen that are way past us environmentalists talking to people about what needs to happen.
No, I think though we have an opportunity to engage people, to widen the discussion, to have dialogue where marginal voices are brought in and heard.
Yeah.
Mary Murphy, I'd like to bring you in.
You actually ironically just said what I was going to say. Just to say thanks very much. It was a really, really useful discussion. And I know Si started out by, showing that debate that's going on, particularly in the UK context of the moderate versus radical. And I think just the dangers of that type of debate going down a rabbit hole, when the reality is it's not so much what the environmental movement is doing or what its strategy is. It is that looking outside it and joining the dots and making the alliances. I came across a really nice phrase the other day that necessity is the mother of coalition. Nancy Falbray says it. And I do think it is about trying to be imaginative about the new types of coalitions that might emerge in the context of some of the new agendas that will emerge about the distributional impacts of some of these policies and the likely sort of coalitions that we mightn't think would be natural coalitions, but which may emerge, and we need to be creative and imaginative about how we engage with them. So instead of like radicals versus moderates, I think just not getting in each other's way is a good thing. Just respect that we all want and respect that there are different models of change and that, the strengths and weaknesses of them all, but just the more the merrier, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. Sally, you were first, and then Sabine. Let's keep it short. We've got a very small space. Be good to hear some more voices. Sally.
Okay, I think I'm on the train here. Mary just said what I was going to say about it not being adversarial unnecessarily, and that there's a way of negotiating to the imagination. And that documentary is fantastic because it shows people being literally transformed by the information. They're changing their minds. They came in with one mindset or no knowledge. It's really good. And the fact that it was broadcast, itself will inform a whole lot more people. So I think it was really, really good. The timing of the broadcast is a bit weird, but otherwise it's good. And well done with the webinar. But I think the thing is to always be positive and urgent in the messaging. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, Sally. And Sally's referring to that documentary on BBC Two last week about the UK's Citizen Assembly. I don't know how you can see BBC or real television. We can't see it on the
well, I am just going for the ferry. I've been in the UK. I'm just going for I'm on the way to Holyhead here, and so I was watching it in real time. But it was exceptionally good. And in fairness to Alok Sharma and all the rest of them, they really laid good grounding, and the resources are online too, and they are excellent.
Okay. Thanks, Sally.
Thank you.
Sabine, you spent almost 2 weeks with us here in Cloughjordan. The floor is yours.
And I'd love to come back because here in Skerries we are trying our best to learn from elsewhere, especially from what you're doing there in Cloughjordan. And we've just struck another trip to Tib, as we called it, off our list for the next February or March because, hey, COVID. So there's so many things I would love to talk about and I won't but just thank you for having this series. Saif, thank you so much for opening up the discussion at the beginning. It was so, it clarified a good few things for me, and your focus on where can we put, your question, where can we put our emphasis, our energy to get some leverage? That's what nearly keeps me up at night. It's such a depressing time. It's such a hopeful time. It's confusing at the same time. For instance, the farmers. I mean, I've been doing a lot of learning around regenerative agriculture in the last year. I was just at Biofarm 2021 last week here in Ireland, the Irish Farmers Conference. And it's just those people who make the transition to nature, close to nature farming, regenerative agriculture, they're all happier, a lot happier, it seems, anecdotally, and I'm sure there are stats as well. Yet, how do you reach conventional farmers? And I think for all of us, we all eat every day. Food is so central. you've done a lot of work, Ollie and Davy and others, on food sovereignty for Ireland, which is something that we want to move forward in Skerries as well. And, you know, start in Skerries and make the whole world right again. So no pressure there. I'm not too sure, where can we start? How can we win those minds? Is it like having loads of teach-ins at the next ploughing championship, if that's going ahead even? Bring over Gabe Brown and make him do his soil test in front of everybody there? Well, you know, and of course, I haven't even had that worry before that Sinn Féin and those people aren't on board on the whole climate change process the way that we would have hoped. But, you know, thanks for putting that worry into my head there, Si. Anyway, I better stop meandering here.
Thanks, Sabine. Claudio Manfredi, in the chat, you've put a piece in. I don't know if you want to speak it as a last response, just talking about the need to make connections. I think it builds on a little Eileen mentioned just about how we need to overcome fragmentation by seeing ourselves as ecosystems locally, and the connections that we need to make, seeing the relationships as the health of the whole rather than for the individual entity or individual. Claudio? No, it doesn't look like it. Pader, I think we're coming to the end, so I'm going to pass back to you for a recap before handing back to Veronica.
Well, thank you all very much. I think we've had a very rich discussion. I certainly don't expect clear outcomes out of discussions like this, but I think one of the tasks is to complicate matters, is to make us realize there are no easy answers, but also to make us realize we all have power. We all have power to do real things that matter to us and that also make us happier. I was delighted that Pauliina put a lot of emphasis on that, on well-being, on our happiness, on living according to what matters to us and not what the system, you know, often quite forces us to do. And that's why system change, not climate change, is such a telling phrase, because it focuses on the fact that it's not us and the things we do as individuals, it's the way in which the system puts huge pressure on us to act in certain ways and to make us much more conscious of that. So thank you all very much. I mean, I'm delighted that we had Pauliina, we had Saul, we had Eileen, and of course we had Sadhbh to link us then to the wider global political realities. So thank you all for very, very much. Thank everybody for joining us. And so I'll hand over to Veronica to close.
Thank you, Pader and Davy. And as Pader said, it was a real pleasure to be joined by Sadhbh and Pauliina and Eileen and Saul, and for your rich contributions, and all of you for coming. So I wanted to end by just letting you know that we're shortly going to be launching an initiative that we've been working on with TNI, which is a municipal to municipal solidarity project. We in Cloughjordan Ecovillage were partnered with an organization called Cargonomia in Budapest earlier this year. And we've created some content around the theme of European solidarity, including some podcasts and a photo essay. So keep an eye out for the launch of our new initiative with TNI, which I'll be keeping you informed of quite soon. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you back to further deep listening series in the future. Take care. Bye now.